Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 169 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is Thomas van Schaik, a brand strategist with over 25 years of experience in athlete branding and the author of the Athlete Brand Book. He helps athletes build better brands, boosting their independence, influence, income, and impact. We spoke about what is athlete branding, the 3 C's, his time with Adidas, trust in the sports industry, the importance of AI in branding, the concept of 1,000 fans, and much more. Thomas van Schaik, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. So let's kick off straight off the bat. You are a brand strategist, over 25 years of experience in athlete branding, written a book on the topic. We'll talk about all of this. But what is brand?
Brand is a mysterious thing. It basically lives inside your mind, and it's the associations and attributions that you have when you think of a certain topic. And clearly, people aren't brands. Often brands are created to service markets, and that's not why people are there. So people are not necessarily brands, but the theory and techniques that corporations use to build brands can also be used to affect reputations and associations associated with athletes. So while the word branding and brand building for athletes is ironically has a very bad reputation, the time where athletes did not have brands or did not work as brands is behind us. Every athlete has a brand. The only choice they have is to what extent they actually try to impact, improve, or affect their reputation.
So in the book you wrote also, a good brand is a promise kept. What do you mean by that?
Well, you have an association and an expectation of a brand. And if a brand does not deliver or does not live up to that promise, then obviously you leave disappointed and frustrated, and you start second guessing the associations that you had in your mind in the first place. So when I say Mercedes, or when I say Coca-Cola, or when I say Emirates, you have an expectation of the level of that service. The first examples of brands were arguably the stonemasons that were building the Egyptian pyramids. Some of those stonemasons had their own little peculiar sign-off, their own visual element, and it was a mark of their craftsmanship and a testament of their skill. And this idea of that your brand is actually a testament to the level of the product that you create or the service that you deliver, I think is a very powerful metaphor.
How much have the idea of athlete branding changed with NIL and everything? Obviously, US is a huge market for sport. So with the whole NIL thing coming about, how do you think that has affected the perception of athlete branding?
Well, I don't think it has affected the ideas about athlete branding. It has increased the ability of athletes to actually make money of their brand power. I mean, if we look at the history of sports, then until 1950, sports was basically an event-driven business. You bought the ticket, and the person that was organizing the event was making the money. Then sports became a television product. From the 1980s onward, it became a satellite television business where we were filling television stations with sports content for 24 hours a day. And that meant that other than sports, we were also interested in the opinions of pundits. We were also interested in the lifestyle of athletes. We got more humanized story angles simply because there was not enough sport to fill 24 hours of sports every day. And then from the 2000s, we got this idea of digitization where social media channels were being born, and sport assets like FC Barcelona, Real Madrid, the NBA were starting to build communities around their sports asset. And now what we're seeing is that content creation and distribution have been commoditized, and athletes are outperforming rights holders on social to a state of 10-1. So if we look at Messi, Ronaldo, and Neymar, then they have 1.8 billion followers together. And that compares to just 430 million of the NBA, the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, and the FIFA World Cup. So those 5 assets have 430 million followers, whereas these 3 individual football players have 1.8 billion followers. To enrich this example, or to make it more concrete, one javelin thrower from India has more followers than the IOC. So if we look at the balance of power, then it's definitely shifting towards individual athletes. And that is offering athletes unprecedented and incredible opportunities that, in my opinion, they are not yet making optimal use of. And for the purpose of this podcast, I would also say that if we look at administrators or managers in the sports industry, your listeners, then I would urge them to embrace this growing athlete influence, because it's incredible that many sports managers are still looking at their athletes as competitors, and the war for talent is over and the talent has won. So it's great for sports rights holders to embrace athlete influence, to facilitate athletes, to collaborate with athletes in a more equal sense, rather than just I pay, you play kind of partnership. There's incredible opportunity for a deeper level of collaboration.
For sure. And you said also that there's so much power on the athlete side now and the athlete branding. How can they leverage that to its fullest potential?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, it's an easy question, but it's difficult to answer. If we start at the definition of what is a brand, how do you build a brand, which elements actually build a brand, then there are 3 main components to brand building. One of them is distinctiveness. How and what is different to you than to everybody else. That's number 1. Number 2 is consistency. How easy is it to recognize you? How authentic are you? If you are truly yourself, then it's easy to recognize you, right? How consistent can you be? How easy can you make it for others to recognize your brand? And the third is visibility. Also frequency. How visible are you? The lower your traditional media exposure is, the more you will rely on your own content creation. So if we look at distinctiveness, consistency, and frequency or visibility, then all 3 of those components can be intensified, improved, or adjusted. You can either work on being more consistent, you can either work on being more distinctive, or you could work on improving your visibility. Now, with that, you could either improve your independence, you could improve your income, you could improve your influence, or you could focus on your societal impact. That's up to the individual athlete, depending on what your goals are. Now, what I really love is that this is not just a movement that is focusing on the Cristiano Ronaldos with his 900 million Instagram followers. That's not the point. The idea that I love is an idea from a guy called Kevin Kelly, who wrote a beautiful essay called 1000 True Fans. And his prediction was that in the creator economy, creators would only require 1000 true fans to make a living wage. And when we're addressing the wage gap in sports, then I would urge particularly athletes from smaller sports, niche markets, or undercovered sports to say, okay, answer me these 3 questions. Who are the 1000 fans you would love? Who are those people? What do they do? Why do they support you? What is it they want? Where are they? The second question is, second challenge, can you make a digital connection with them? Can you either attract them as followers or evolve them into subscribers? How can you actually start a connection with your 1000 true fans? And the third would be, what are the products and services that would actually deliver genuine value to your 1000 true fans? What is it that your fans would pay 100 euros for? If you could answer those 3 questions, who are your fans? Where are they? Can I make a connection? And what do they want? Then every athlete would be able to make a living wage.
1,000 seems very low in this case.
It's a metaphor in the sense, if you can find 1,000 to spend 100 euros, you've made 100,000 euros. Once you have that, you can either worry about getting 1,001 fans, or you can worry about making them spend 101 euro. It's The idea here is that if you are really a professional athlete, every professional athlete right now is creating content. But how many athletes actually understand for whom they are creating this content, why they are creating this content, and to what end they are creating this content? And the disappointing fact is that too many of these athletes do not have a plan, to the detriment of their sponsors, to the detriment of their rights holders, and to the detriment of their own income. So facilitating and equipping athletes not only with a plan and a strategy, but also with the right digital infrastructure would present incredible opportunity to athletes as well as right holders.
I'm just thinking like there is a balance here. Like obviously you can take help of someone like yourself, but as an athlete, you want to maximize your sport and play, train as much as possible, get to the best of your ability. But of course, you need the sponsorship money as well. But how much time? What if you're not an extrovert guy and you want to be, you need to be on social media and to do that. So there's a little bit of a balance of the content versus your sport, I feel. How do you see that?
Well, I would say that the line that I have that for that is from MVP to MVP. It is your talent that makes you the minimal viable product. Without your talent, you have no right competing on that level, right? It makes you the minimal viable product, but it is your brand that makes you the most valuable player. So if you are if you are a professional athlete, then the question is, what is your job and why are you getting paid? What is the professional job of an athlete? What would you say?
To perform on the field or the pitch.
Many people that perform, but they are not getting paid.
To be professional, isn't that's your main income?
I don't think it makes a living. The fact that you perform doesn't make a living. That's not the reason why athletes are getting paid. In my opinion, athletes get paid for the attention they attract. The more attention they attract, the more money they will be paid.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry to interrupt you, but yes, I would agree with that, because then you have the like men versus women's sports discussion that comes in a lot, and that's the argument that many people pull as well. That the more eyeballs, the more dollars.
It's 100% the case. That's why we're getting paid. So what we are seeing now is that it is not just about more, but it is also about a fragmented media market, right? So there's this idea about capsule or niche celebrities that are catering to their dedicated audience. And this is where the 1,000 true fans come back into play. If you are able to attract and engage your own dedicated audience, then you're capable of making a living. But the idea of attracting attention and not just competing in a capsule where you are your best. You can be your best, but that's not making you an income. You need to be your best and attract an audience. So from my point of view, the audience element, servicing your audience, providing value for your audience is your primary responsibility. Now, obviously, that can only be done after you compete at your best level. But competing at your best level will not make you an income. It's not enough.
Interesting, because we talked before we hit record, we talked about Mondo Duplantis, the world record holder in pole vault. So he's crushing everybody. He's 20 centimeters above the guy who's number 2. So what you're saying is that, and which I agree with, if he's doing that, he breaks a record every year and no one is watching it, then it doesn't create him any type of monetary value or brand value.
Well, it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. Clearly, winning will result in visibility, right? So your brand doesn't decide who will win, but branding does decide the earnings of the winner. So clearly, if you win, you will get visibility, but without a strong brand, that visibility will not result in income.
And we talked before also, with his girlfriend is very active on social media and documenting his life, and obviously that strengthens his brand as well to get this type of behind-the-scenes content, I assume.
Yeah, it's like if you look at an athlete, then obviously his performance is a lion's share of his appeal, but it is not 100% his brand. There's also his flamboyant and beautiful personality. There's also his community. There's also his passion. There's also his monetization. So these 5 different elements are building up a more holistic narrative. We can see how he dresses. We can see his sense of style. We can see quite a significant part of his personal life which dimensionalizes him and allows us to get much closer to who he really is. And that is, I believe, that is the part that actually excites fans.
Do you have any other like good case studies or like athletes that proves your point in this case?
Incredible amounts of athletes are doing this in very, very strong ways. Let me point out the Norwegian dude who was also known as the Muffin Man, who was creating content around the muffins in the Olympic Village. I think he created around 160 million views on TikTok. A better example, I think, is Tom Daley. He's a diver from the UK, a very strong LGBTQ advocate who loves knitting. And as he was knitting on the stands while he was waiting his turn, he started a knitting company, Made with Love by Tom Daley, which is basically an e-commerce business that sells patterns, wool, and has turned out to be the biggest knitting company on the planet with over 1 million followers on Instagram. Just this company, Made with Love. So there's a variety of examples that are showing. I mean, Simone Biles is another great example. Clearly, she's the world's best. She's the GOAT. But during the Olympics, she was creating content on a daily basis, taking people with her on her journey through the Olympic Village, making people insiders on a day-by-day basis, growing her account with over 6 million followers. So there's lots of athletes of this new generation for whom social media creation is not something that feels out of touch. It's part of their daily lives. They are digital natives. Storytelling is basically part of their core skill to an increasing level. Athletes are understanding the incredible value of the attention they attract.
You've said that you shouldn't build your brand on rented land. What do you mean by that?
Well, social media handles right now, if we look at Meta or if we look at YouTube, then they can change the algorithms and all of a sudden you'll be invisible for your followers. So the idea is that I believe athletes should take more ownership of their digital appeal. I feel every athlete should have a website. I feel most athletes should actually build a database, evolving their followers into subscribers and starting a direct relationship that is not owned by Meta rather than by themselves. So clearly, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, or Patreon, or OnlyFans, or whatever platform you'd want to own, offers athletes enormous opportunity. There are more and more accessible no-code tools that take all the complication away from athletes to connect with their audience. And that's fantastic. However, I would still want to see more athletes owning their own databases, building their own proprietary assets in the digital space. And right now, if you would Google an athlete name, what does an athlete find? If your name is also your brand name, then you would want some of your own assets to pop up and you wouldn't want others to own your name for you.
We have talked about branding and everything. And if we go back to you, you are a co-founder of the Athlete brand. So can you talk a little bit about what you do with your company?
Well, what I do is I provide brand strategy and digital infrastructure. And the idea there is that the classic athlete entourage has an agent. It has a deal maker, maybe a lawyer or a physiotherapist or a nutritionist. But brand strategy typically is not an asset that is regularly represented within a classic athlete entourage. And this is an opportunity because sports as an industry is more and more brand driven, where in the past it was a geographic business. And, I come from Utrecht, which means that, when I was young, I was a fan of FC Utrecht. It's where I was from. It's not my hometown. But if I go out in the street now and I ask an 8-year-old who he supports, then he will likely say that he supports Real Madrid or Liverpool instead of FC Utrecht. And this means that the remote fan, that you can be a fan of anybody, anywhere, at any time, has made a dramatic impact on the sports industry, making it a much more brand-driven industry. In addition to the remote fan, we've seen the rise of the fluid fan. And the fluid fan used to be a fan of FC Barcelona, then became a fan of Paris Saint-Germain, and is now a fan of Inter Miami FC because Leo Messi now plays for Inter Miami FC, which is why we've seen the social media following of Inter Miami FC go from 1 million before Leo Messi joined to over 17 million now that Leo Messi is there. And this idea of this brand-led industry is challenging athletes to think about their reputation with more intention, with more ownership. No athlete is going to have 100% control over their reputation, but they do have a stake, they do have a choice, and they do have the capability to guide their brand with more intent. Second point there is that we help athletes with digital infrastructure. It's like, if so much of your value now happens online, then why are athletes so incredibly under-equipped when it comes to their digital infrastructure? Right now, they're relying on an uncle or a neighbor to build them a website, and they're just losing value because they don't really know how to grow their community, how to monetize their influence, or how to advocate for more social impact. That's what we focus on with Athlete Brand.
That's so interesting. Is it different from your perspective if you are working with a player in a team sport, or if, for example, an individual from an individual sport?
Of course, the tactics are different. The tone might be different. But if we are being very honest, and we take, for instance, soccer or football as a departure point, then the reality is that right now, every 2 years or every 3 years, a player will switch teams. And this is why I would advocate for athletes to think of themselves as entrepreneurs. They are the entrepreneurs of brand U, and they're running their own business. They are their own CEO, and they collaborate with rights holders. Of course, it's fantastic to have a fantastic rights holder, but what we see is that athletes are increasingly choosing where to play. They are growing their influence to dramatic amounts. So why does LeBron play in LA and no longer in Cleveland? I think it is because there are more commercial opportunities for LeBron in Los Angeles than there are in Cleveland. And this is why he decided to take his talent to LA. We see the same in European football. So the idea that, of course, you are part of a team, and of course, all these values of camaraderie, authenticity, teamwork, being a great colleague, are very much part of why we love and like athletes as much as we do. But the reality is that they are individual entrepreneurs in charge of building their own business and brand.
Be the CEO of your own life. That's a saying that people say, and it applies very much here.
Yeah, and I think it's also completely realistic to say, if an athlete gets injured and he is stretchered off the field, he will be silently replaced, and we'll see if he comes back. It's not egocentric to look out for yourself when you're an athlete. It's a very vulnerable profession. There's incredible individual pressure that athletes will have to deal with. There's huge expectations. The window of opportunity is extremely short, and athletes should be looking out for themselves, and they shouldn't sell themselves short.
So talking about content creation, brand strategy, the athlete branding, how important is AI, you think, in this field and also now going forward?
AI is a tool, and like every tool, its effectiveness depends on how you use it, right? You can either use a hammer to build a house, or you can hammer to kill somebody. It's like, you can't blame the tool. What we do see is that digital infrastructure, digital tooling is becoming more and more easy to use. So content creation, distribution, but also product creation has become easier and easier. So there are lots of no-code tools that are very easy to use and implement, provided you have a plan. And the same applies for artificial intelligence and the blockchain, or for websites, or for e-commerce sites, or for sites that allow you to create your own merch, or any of those platforms, right? There's tons of them out there. If you do not have a plan, all of it is just stuff, and the world has enough stuff. So this is why I advocate for strategy first, everything else second. And once you know what it is that you want, who it is that you are, where it is that you want to go, now you can start making conscious choices. And of course, you just mentioned the book that I wrote. It's 600 pages. Of course, I completely understand that there are very, very, very few athletes that will read a 600-page book on athlete branding. But artificial intelligence will be able to not only help them use those strategies, but also combine the different elements that we refer to in the book into easy and accessible content. So, of course, AI is going to be a major component into unlocking digital capability for athletes, whether that is from building sites, from creating product to creating content. It will be a huge help. And even if we talk about the analytics of their database or identifying their best working content or helping them optimize their posting frequency or their content strategy, of course, AI is going to be a major help for them. So this is why I'm extremely optimistic about the future and why I believe there are many, many opportunities for athletes to collaborate with their rights holders and the rest of the industry, but also be taken more seriously as primary stakeholders.
And you mentioned your book there, and you have some AI prompts, and you say it's 600 pages, but it is like it's clear, concise chapters. So I think like it's not like you're reading a novel and you're reading 600 pages straight. Like I think it's easy accessible and you can read through. So I think that the athlete should read it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it was written for athlete brand builders. So that's basically anybody that works with athletes, which basically means everybody working in sports. If you're an administrator, if you're a sponsor, if you're an agent, if you're lecturing sports marketing, I feel there's a lot of content in there. But, in all fairness, I always say there's two types of book. There's books that are written for the people that read them and books that are written for the people that write them. This was a typical example of a passion project. I just loved writing it. I wrote it during the pandemic. I loved every second of it. And if there are people that enjoy reading it, then I'm super excited. But it's a passion project that I love making. It's helping me now to help athletes.
So during COVID, that's when I started this podcast. I think there was a lot of people that took on the projects that they wanted for a long time and I didn't. So I assume that was the case for you with the book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how have you had this idea for a long time, and now was the time to do it, or was it something that grew during COVID?
No, I've worked for Adidas for about 15 years, and one of my roles was that I was leading the global icon building department, and that more or less meant that all the athletes we contracted submitted their plans, then we laid it over the Adidas plan, and then we started activating in the middle. But the sad truth was that out of all the contracts, all the athletes that we contracted, virtually no athlete had a plan. And this meant that I started making athlete plans in order for them to lay over the Adidas plan so that we could activate in the middle. And that always stuck with me, because if I ask athletes, how important is this? How important is your personal brand? They will also always acknowledge that it's super important. They'll rate it an 8 out of 10 important. But my follow-up question is, do you have a plan? And then sadly, the answer is no, I do not have a plan. And the same applies to rights holders. Rights holders, if we refer to Corona, rights holders, have to face the issue that we're at the risk of missing an entire generation of sports fans because of the COVID crisis. And now if we look at the gateway into sports or the gateway into fandom, then usually that tends to be through the acts of the athlete. Fans are fans of individual athletes before they are fans of a particular sport. And this idea of athletes being so attractive and exciting fans or exciting young fans is incredibly important, because either sports invest in developing and facilitating and creating iconic athletes, or they run the risk of being irrelevant. So by investing in individual athlete brands, by investing in building stars, rights holders are, in effect, investing in themselves.
When you were at Adidas, you worked with along athletes like David Beckham, Leo Messi, Anna Kournikova. So this was obviously it was a couple of years ago. Was the idea of an athlete brand as clear as it is maybe today, or was that something that maybe they didn't think about so much?
No, I don't think it was as clear as it is today, because athletes were relying on others for their relationships with their fans. There were traditional gatekeepers that were stopping athletes from directly interacting with fans. Right now, that's no longer the case. Athletes were relying on others to create the content about them rather than create the content themselves, like our Norwegian Muffin Man, Mondo, or Simone Biles were doing. They were themselves involved in creating the content. And what we see now is that these athlete creators, these athlete entrepreneurs, these athlete activists have not only developed their own voice, they are also less and less shy about using their voice to be loud about the things that matter to them most. Whether it is Ilona Maher, the Rugby Sevens US creator, who was loud about body positivity, whether it was Colin Kaepernick, who stood up against police brutality, or whether it is Marcus Rashford, who spoke out on improving the school meals in the UK. If it matters to you and it's authentic, athletes are using their platform more and more. Or Salah speaking out in the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Athletes are going to speak out about things that matter to them and their community. That's definitely new in the sense that athletes are finding their own voice. They have their own channels. They can create their own content, and they are not depending on anybody else. And they will not be stopped by anybody else to be loud about the things that matter to them most.
So if we go through your career, you mentioned Adidas, but you worked prior at the NFL Europe, SV Eindhoven. So can we walk through your career ladder and see how it's been like?
Sure. Yeah, well, I have never not worked in sports. I started out in the NFL Europe, like you said. That was the Amsterdam Admirals. We played in the NFL Europe against a range of teams. Talent was amazing. We had some amazing American football talent on the team. From there, made the switch to PSV Eindhoven. That was in the time of Ruud van Nistelrooy, Luc Niels, Jaap Stam, Boudewijn Zende, Philippe Cocu. We had a very, very decent team. Arjen Robben, amazing talent. Loved that period. Actually turned me into a PSV fan, which I still am today. Very passionate. Joined Adidas as their head of global PR, working with athletes like the Zinedine Zidanes and David Beckhams that you mentioned. Became their global brand director, did the Olympics, did the World Cups, did the track and field world championships, NBA All-Stars, all of those amazing athletes, which was amazing. Left Adidas to become the CMO of the Dutch Olympic and Paralympic Committee, did the games of Rio as well as Pyeongchang, developing Team NL, a new proposition that actually combined a number of federations under a unified label. Very excited to see Team NL performed this strongly during the most recent Olympics. For a country the size of 18 million, we ended up number 6 on the medal ranking, which is amazing to see. There's a lot of athletic talent in the Netherlands, and particularly the women did deliver very, very strong results during the last Olympics. So that's exciting. And then started my own consultancy, the Athlete Brand, where I focus on building better athlete brands to boost their independence, influence, income, and impact. And that's what I'm focusing on at the moment.
Wow. Lot of experience there, from definitely like Adidas, 14, 15 years there, but also with the Dutch Olympic and Paralympic Committee. You've been very close to the athletes during these years. And what are some learnings that you've taken from that you can now implement at the Athletes brand?
Nothing that you can't pick up from a little bit of empathy, I think. Obviously, the pressures on athletes are huge. Obviously, their vulnerability is high. It's a very challenging sport. And if you look at entrepreneurship as a whole, then I would say entrepreneurship basically combines three different elements of your personality, aspects of your personality. It combines the champion, the competitor, and the creator. And if we look at the champion, that's everything you've learned in the past. It's all your experiences. It's all your titles. It's your entire network. It's all your former coaches. All of that is combined in the champion. It's the story that you've built so far. It's what you've earned. If we look at the competitor, then that's basically the comfort zone of every athlete. It's healthy eating. It's enough sleep. It's a lot of practice. It's, beating your next opponent. It's executing your tasks. It's the comfort zone for every athlete. But now we get to the creator, and the creator lives in the future. The creator is your long-term plan. The creator is your future vision. And this is out of the comfort zone for most athletes. Athletes tend to be focused on the competitor. They love living in the here and now, and that has a lot to do with the incredible vulnerability of being a high-performance athlete. If you're an athlete, you were a young kid with a lot of talent, Your dad was the coach. Your mom was driving the van. You just loved what you did. And, you played for fun. And then all of a sudden you were talented and, you got places. You lost your initial friends. They weren't good enough. You got to a higher team. And in the end, here you are. Here you're left with fans to please, sponsor to service, prizes to win, media to content to create. All of a sudden you're facing this entire new profession and you really don't know what your plan is. You're just happy to be there. Like every young athlete, you're humble and hungry. Give me a chance. Allow me to show you what I can do. And now all of a sudden you're part of an industry that you don't really understand. And that's the dirty little secret of the sports industry, is that young athletes enter this industry without much of a clue. And that's extremely vulnerable position to be in. And you can't learn it fast enough because it's only a couple of years and then you're out again. So that's a challenging position to be in, and it requires athletes to trust the people around them. It forces them to trust their rights holders. It forces them to trust the people that they work with at the club. It forces them to trust their agent. It forces them or their parents to develop new skill sets very rapidly. And this is very, very challenging because when you're forced to trust people, it makes you feel extremely vulnerable. And that makes long-term planning very difficult. And this is a situation that unfortunately many athletes find themselves in. Unfortunately, the sports world is filled with lots of people that they can actually trust, right? So clearly, most of the people that work in sports and most of your listeners, they are in sports because it's such an incredible industry. It's such an inspirational place to be, where you make muscles stronger, communities tighter, friendships deeper, lives longer. It's beautiful. This is why I love working in sports. It's super exciting. But for many athletes, it can be quite overwhelming. There's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of pressure. And it's an incredible competitive industry. So I understand that for many athletes, it's a vulnerable place to be.
Yeah, I understand that as well. And we talked about before, like being the CEO of your own life and take ownership. And maybe, as you said, like you are forced to rely on some people, but maybe you should try in the way that it goes to educate yourself and to, get to know a little bit more yourself. So you're not maybe 100% independent on other people.
Yeah, it's like there's this model that I also use in the book, where basically every athlete is coming of age, right? So whether you're in gymnastics and you're at your peak, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing it, but when you're 14, or whether you're in the NBA or college athlete and you get to the NBA, or, basically every athlete is young and talented, relying on their parents as their primary caregivers and advice source, to being an adult and being 35 when they retire. You are not only developing as an athlete, but also as a human being. You are growing into your own. And this idea of relying on your parents and becoming more independent and taking your own decisions is quite often a relatively painful process for most individual athletes. But it's mandatory. It's, when there's so much pressure on you when you're still this young, of course, you're forced to rely on your parents as your primary source for advice and insight. But this industry is so complicated that not every athlete has parents that are capable of learning these new skills that are required fast enough. And most often they shouldn't, because it's too complicated. You need to rely on others. And finding the right sources of information and guidance, I think, is what most parents should actually counsel their young children on.
Talking about the challenges in the industry, have you had any challenges or bump in the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, of course. To be honest, I think you learn most of your failures. And this is why I am a genuine believer in facilitating failure. I love it when, it's weird to say that I love it when people make mistakes, but it's about taking risks. So there's also a little bit of creativity. And when you are stimulating people to think outside of the box, then there should be room for failure. Clearly, you want to succeed, and clearly there are objectives, and clearly there's responsibilities. But within those given guide rails and objectives, there needs to be room for creative freedom. And creative freedom implies that there's also room to fail. And I've come up with ideas that never really worked. I've come up with ideas that were sensational, but the ideas that work wouldn't have been there without the failures. They go hand in hand. And I've always had the pleasure of having managers that were stimulating me to be creative, that were stimulating me to think outside of the box, knowing full well that not every idea would work.
Because that would make you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, well, also creativity is like when you try new things, It means that, you're painting outside of the lines, which means, it could be a hit or miss. It's, you are only free to experiment and try out new things if you know that failure is not automatically going to result in you getting fired. If the sanction of failure is dismissal, nobody's going to try and experiment and do anything weird. If the power of true brands is distinctiveness, what's exceptional or different about you, then amplifying your distinctiveness, being weird, embracing your weirdness is going to be part of your key strength. But it is also playing very close to the fire. When you take risks, things can go wrong. But when you take risks, there's also the opportunity of unexpected success.
100%. Approaching the end here, is there something I haven't asked you yet that you feel is important to mention?
I would love to see athletes and rights holders embrace a more equal and collaboration, partnership, I think the word is. Right now, many rights holders they understand that they do not only share an industry, they also share an audience. And when we look at who is attracting and engaging the audience, then it's not difficult to see that athletes are among the most powerful influencers that we have on the planet. And right now, many rights holders are still chasing these athletes to look into the camera, say a couple of words, or hold up a product, or say something nice, or, make a quick piece of content, rather than genuinely collaborating and thinking in win-win partnerships, where I think there is incredible opportunity for growth for virtually every rights holder. So if there's one thing that I would love to amplify, then it is that potential, saying, okay, let's look at your athletes in a different way and see how we can actually empower and facilitate athletes on a more eye-to-eye level to see how these partnerships could get new value and unlock new doors.
I love that. And also, if we plug your book final time, if someone wants to buy the book, where can they find it?
It's probably the easiest is the www.theathletebrandbook.com. That would be the easiest way to find it, I guess. And thank you for your time and your interest. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much. I will put a link in the show notes as well, so it makes it easier for the listeners. And Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.